Hey everyone. I'm Jules, and I'm responsible for developer relations on the Angular team here at Google. I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of what's included in Angular 2, and then Kara, one of our amazing engineers, is going to give us actually a live demo of some of the pieces I'm going to talk about working together. Also, for Spaces, one of our developer advocates, Steven, will be posting links throughout the session as we talk about things that might be of interest to you. So first, how many of you are Angular 1 developers? You guys aren't allowed to answer. Just kidding, I already knew. Awesome, there's a lot of you, great. So as we like to do here on the Angular team, I'm going to start with talking a little bit about our community. Because as an open source framework, Angular isn't just built by those of us here at Google. And you'll hear we're really excited about some of the collaboration we've been able to do with our community. So while we look at things like search metrics or the number of contributors to our repo account, we actually have traditionally used the number of 30-day actives to visiting our doc site to determine our community size. So late last year, we announced that there was about 1.1 million people visiting the Angular 1 site. And then, good? And then when we ran those numbers again this month, we saw a growth of about 200,000 people, reaching 1.3 million developers learning Angular 1. And since we put Angular 2 into beta, we've been pleasantly surprised that over 450,000 people are visiting the Angular 2 site. We also recently moved Angular 2 from beta into its release candidacy. And during the beta phase, we worked with a number of internal Google teams, like the Google Fiber team and the Green Tea team, which is actually our internal CRM system. And these teams have been providing us with a lot of feedback, they've been validating our approach, and they've been validating the use cases that Angular 2 is great in. We've also worked with a number of partners, some of whom are here today, like Meteor, Ionic, Telerik, our publishing partners, our training partners, all to make sure that the Angular 2 ecosystem is ready for you. We've also worked with a number of big customers, like the Weather Channel, Capital One, and Lucid Charts, who are all using Angular 2 already. Where Angular 1 was a framework that helped you build web applications more easily with things like easy data binding and testability, Angular 2 is a platform that encompasses a lot more. We started with dependency injection, both making it simpler and also more capable as it now supports lazy loading. And something that I don't think we talk about enough is the work we do in the community to bring, with the standards community, to bring the web platform forward. And a couple examples of that are the work we've done with the Ember team on decorators, which is an extension of the JavaScript framework. I'm trying to get out of that error. Which is an extension of the JavaScript framework that allows you to add metadata to your code. And you'll see that was really powerful for Angular, and also how you'll create components in Angular 2. And also the work that Brian Ford and our creator of Angular, Mishko, did on zones. And zones are what makes Angular and other frameworks be able to schedule the painting we need to do, improving speed. But for all of you Angular 1 developers out there, you can think of zones as the reason that you'll never have to use $apply again. We also have a new compiler that is not only faster, but allows us to do offline compilation, which allows us to drop large parts of the framework, improving our speed. We have a new change detection strategy that is 10 times faster than what we were capable of with Angular 1. We have a new renderer that, again, is faster and also has a pluggable architecture, so we can render to the DOM like we always have, but we can also render where there is no DOM, like on a server. We have a bunch of libraries so that when you're building real-world apps, you have everything you need. And we're working on Angular Material 2, so you get a nice set of responsive, rich UI components. The mobile toolkit that helps you get started faster, and Kara's going to demo a little of this. An Angular Universal that allows Angular to run on the server. But a platform is not just the APIs and the libraries. It's also about your productivity as developers. So we have a new Angular CLI that allows all the scaffolding from how you create a component, how you create routes, to how you generate your test infrastructure, much, much easier. And we work with partners like Microsoft on a set of language services that allow you to have intelligent code completion and refactoring in your favorite IDE. And for debug at runtime, we have a tool called Angular Augury. And I'm going to actually show you a little bit about that in a couple minutes. And finally, we have a library called ng-upgrade. ng-upgrade allows you to seamlessly mix and match Angular 1 and Angular 2 components, even in an app running in production, so you can migrate your apps at your own pace. When I joined the Angular team last year, I set out to see, well, what do we need to do to actually make Angular 2 awesome for all of you? And I talked to all of our developers and our customers and our partners, and I worked with one of our Angular GDEs named Jeff Welpley, and we developed a survey. And we took all that feedback and we kind of rolled it up, And we found that we really had 3 places that we need to just get right. And the first of those is being amazing performance anywhere you want to use Angular. The second is, again, developer productivity so that you can write apps and maintain them more easily. And the third is versatility, which is actually twofold. It's versatility of Angular to work where you want it to work, and also the versatility of Angular to meet the needs of all the roles on your developer team, from developers to designers. So let's take a look at each of those. First, with performance. You've heard me use the word fast a number of times now. Our goal was really to be small and fast in all scenarios that you would use Angular. So in the beta phase, when we took a look at how we were doing, we analyzed ourselves against Angular 1. And what we found is that on initial render, we were 2.5 times faster than Angular 1. And when the browser had already seen that view on re-render, we were about 4.2 times faster. And we thought this was cool, but we really wanted to be better. And remember I said we had a number of internal customers. Well, one of those is a little product you may have heard of called AdWords. And AdWords was like, Angular team, those are great, but we really want you to be faster. And so this is where you really get the benefit of all that internal testing, because with that requirement and our desires, we went back and did a bunch of research. And we eventually set it on a method to generate optimized code that we could replace large parts of the framework. And when we tested this approach, we found we were 5 times faster across the board. We're pretty pleased with that. AdWords is pretty pleased with that. And how this works is that in Angular 1, we would send the entirety of the HTML template up to the browser to be interpreted. But in Angular 2, we have this offline compilation step, so we're actually shipping fully optimized JavaScript. This is JavaScript that you could write yourself if you had the patience and the energy, but we think we've made it much easier to achieve this using our framework. This offline compilation step also solved another big problem for us. When I was doing research on where we were in the state of beta, I read a lot of posts about how big Angular 2 was. And at 170K, you aren't wrong. Especially when we compare that to Angular 1 at 56K. But this week, our team has gotten together, and we've been able to successfully demonstrate a hello world, minified and compressed app at 22K. But we're not going to stop there, because our engineering director, Brad Green, promised us a chocolate cake if we could get to 10K, and all of us on the Angular team really want that chocolate cake. He makes a really good one. It has coffee in it. It's amazing. All right, so it's not just about the size of Angular itself. We also needed to find a way that you could write and architect your apps so that they would be smaller for faster rendering. And so we came up with this method of automatic lazy loading. And so the way this works is really routes have a natural demarcation of their dependencies. And so we can infer from routes what you really need to load. And so we can let the router manage lazy loading. So when a user selects route 1, you just get the bits for route 1. And when a user selects route 2, you just get the bits for route 2, and you can see where this is going, right? So on and so on. And the next step in performance is Angular Universal, which is a great example of how we've worked with our community, because this is mostly community-driven. And what Angular Universal does is it allows Angular to do server-side rendering. And so the way this works is a user makes a request, Angular is running on the server, and it does a full render there. And it sends down just HTML and CSS. This is obviously much smaller than your full application, and so it's particularly good in 2G or low connectivity scenarios. At the same time we're getting that initial payload down, we start streaming the JavaScript. And there's actually also, thank you, there's actually also an optional pre-boot script, so you can record user actions that occur during this time, and then replay and respond to them so you never lose a user intention. Angular Universal is available today for Node, ASP.NET, and we're working with others like PHP to see what other kinds of server environments we can bring Angular to. And finally, in performance, a word about web workers and some of the experimental work we're doing here. As you probably know, JavaScript is single-threaded, and so this can create some responsiveness issues in your app. I've often heard this called the infamous scrolling stutter problem. And so web workers, they're not new. They've been around for a while, but most people don't use them because they're really hard to use. And one of the key challenges when using web workers is that you get separated from the DOM. So you as a developer have to figure out how to make that communication happen. But with Angular 2's support for web workers, we can now move all of your code and most of Angular into the web worker thread. And we do this with one line of bootstrap configuration by you. One line, no more infamous scrolling stutter. Okay, moving on to productivity. One of the things when I first learned Angular, or am learning Angular, that I struggled with was, how do I see what's happening in this app when I want to debug it? I was kind of used to my Visual Studio environment and all of the tools around that. And so in Angular 1, we had a tool called Batarang, and we worked with the Wrangle team to move this into Angular 2, and we released it recently called Augury. And Augury is a Chrome dev plugin that allows you to see insights into your app at runtime. So we have this little demo called Kitchen Sink, and we can open Augury from the Chrome dev tools, and we automatically see our component tree. We can see our inputs and our outputs, and we can even change those inline so that we can see how data binding works, for example. But the coolest part is this visualization tree. When I open the visualizations for my app, I can see my injection patterns and my routing patterns. This is really cool for me as a developer, but think about if you were a new developer to a project, how fast you could get started by having these kinds of insights into an app. Another thing I heard a lot, is Angular 1 developers were spending too much of their time learning Angular specifics, so all those directives that you need to learn, ng-show, and ng-hide, and ng-cloak. And we really wanted to make this more simple for Angular 2. So in Angular 2, you have two things to remember. One, if you want to data bind to a property, you use square brackets. And if you want to bind to an event, you use parentheses. Two things, 43 extra bits in your brain to go learn something fun that you love. And all this individual productivity talk is great, but we also heard that you never work in teams of one. That usually you have a team that looks more like this, with release managers and testers and designers and whatever's on your team. And we heard from you that you really needed that whole team to understand your app and how components get created, how services are architected, and how it all works together. So again, with our community, we've delivered the Angular 2 style guide. And the style guide provides explicit guidance on architecture, and it goes one step further because it will give you reasoning why or why not you might want to adopt a certain pattern. And if you're using TypeScript, you can take one step further in this journey. And we have a tool called Codalizer that was built by one of our Angular GDEs. So again, this is community built. And Codalizer actually does a static analysis of your code, but it's really cool because it does it against that style guide, so that we can actually give you feedback that's against our best practices. But my favorite part of our developer productivity story is our CLI. I would come to work, when I started on the Angular team, I would come to work every Monday. I'd spend all weekend writing code, ignoring my family. And I would come in and I'd be so frustrated. And I would say, oh my gosh, I spent all this time doing configuration and build and not enough time learning Angular. So it was really awesome to be a part of the team that brought a group of contributors from our community and a couple of our Angular engineers, and we built the CLI. And one of the first things that we did when we took a look at what we needed to do for a command line interface was, what's the natural developer workflow? And we found that it went something like this. You create a project, you generate components, you spin out your dev server, probably put some routes in there. You might want to clean up your code, so use a linter, scaffold, and run some tests. Maybe you do some pre-processing before you build and deploy. So I'm really stoked to say that the CLI we released a couple weeks ago has commands for all of these things. And you're going to get to see Kara use this live in her demo just in a minute. And it kind of takes you from something like this, where you create your project directory, you write all those config files, you install all the node modules while you go get coffee, to this. ng-new, ng-serve. That's it. It all just works at runtime with those 3 lines. And our final category is versatility. We heard loud and clear in all that feedback that it was super important to you that we could take Angular 2 to more places than just the browser. The first step in versatility was decoupling ourselves from the DOM. And then we made a huge investment in mobile. And yesterday, Jeff and Alex and Rob, who are all in the room here today, had a session here at I/O where they went deeper into those specific investments. So if you didn't get to catch that yesterday, I hope you'll watch it on the replay. And Kara's actually going to demo how the CLI works with a mobile flag, so you'll get a little bit more about this in a minute. We had a particular focus on supporting progressive web apps. We got a lot of feedback that it was really hard for your users to find apps and install them from an app store. And so with progressive web apps, it kind of works like this. I'm sure you've heard this a little bit over the week or the few days, which is a user surfs to your website on their phone. It gets auto-installed to the home screen in the background. So when they come back, they get a more user experience that's more app-like. And so Angular is taking advantage of a couple of improvements in the web platform, like service workers, so we can auto-cache your code and your data, and server-side push, so we can push new versions even in offline scenarios, just like native apps do. And specific to Angular is Angular Universal for that really fast first render. web workers for responsiveness, and the CLI to get you started. And finally, if you are still working in installed mobile and that's what you want to do, we've worked with a number of partners to make sure that we can support that too. So Ionic, who is arguably the first adopter of Angular 2 and has been with us almost since day one, they have a solution where they use web views, so you can actually reuse your code across iOS and Android and Windows Phone. You get UIs that look native, and you still have access to the camera or the GPS or whatever you need on the device. And we've worked with the team at Telerik, the NativeScript team, on their solution, so you can build in JavaScript, use all the Angular goodness, and then leverage their renderer that uses native UI. And if you're a React fan, we have a contributor to our community called Amadeus. It's the largest travel company in Europe, and they are literally the poster child for the value that a big company can get out of contributing back to an open source framework. They actually built an Angular 2 and React Native project, and Steven is literally right now posting links to some videos where you can learn more about these projects. And finally, the sort of new old frontier of the desktop. If you still need to write apps for the desktop or you want to reuse your code across the desktop, we have starter kits for Electron and Windows Universal. So let's take a look at that Electron use case because it's very similar to the Windows Universal one. Electron, if you don't know what it is a tool from GitHub. And if you've used Slack on the desktop, anyone use Slack on the desktop? Or VS Code Editor, you're already using an Electron app. So what Electron does is it gives you the pair of Chrome for rendering and Node for processing. You can write an HTML and JavaScript, but you get installers for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And you still get native menus and native notifications, so your app looks and feels just like a normal desktop app. And if you notice, this diagram looks remarkably similar to my web worker diagram. And so with Electron, we can sort of do that same trick and put Angular into the Node process so that it's even faster, but you still get access to all the platform APIs, like authentication and hardware, and you do this all without going over HTTP. So that's pretty cool. And I hope this gives you a nice overview of everything that's included in Angular 2, but the magic is really what Kara is going to show you and how it all works together.
All right, so I'm Kara Erickson. I'm a software engineer on the Angular team, and let's get started. So we've been talking a lot about how robust Angular 2 is as a platform, but now we're going to show you. So I prepared a live demo that combines a lot of the tools that we've been talking about, like Angular Universal, the Angular CLI, the mobile toolkit, material components, Angular material components, and more. So we'll be building an app together. It's a very important app for humanity. It's called Puppy Love. So it's a dating app for dogs to help your dog find his or her doggy soulmate. But the cool thing about this is that it's going to exhibit many of the features of a progressive web app. So it'll be installable to the home screen, it will have an application shell that will render immediately, and it will leverage a service worker to cache your files and assets for a quicker re-render. And at the end, we'll also connect it all up to a Firebase real-time database so we can show you the really cool Angular Fire integration. We'll be using TypeScript for this demo, but don't worry if you don't know TypeScript. It's essentially just ES6 with some types added on top, and we'll post the link to the GitHub repo after if you're curious and want to look at it more closely. I'm recording a demo that was previously done at Google I/O 2016, but due to some technical problems, we didn't capture the footage, so I'm doing it again for you now. So we are going to be combining a number of the tools that we talked about in the first part of the talk, the Angular CLI, Angular Material, Angular Universal, the mobile toolkit, and more. So I've recently created an empty starter repo with the Angular CLI. Since I have the Angular CLI globally installed, I can just run ng-new, the project name, and then --mobile to include the mobile toolkit. What this does is it adds a bunch of files and folders that you'll need for any Angular project, such as the main app component here, puppyloveio.component.ts, the index.html with all of your script tags, the main.ts to bootstrap your app component, and also it sets up all of the build rules for you. So it'll build your TypeScript into JavaScript, it'll set up your System.js module loader, so basically you can serve right out of the box, which is incredibly useful for developer productivity. And since we use the mobile flag, it will add a bunch of helpers for us to create progressive web apps, such as all of these default icons here for the home screen, app shell helpers, and some service worker helpers as well. I've also npm installed some of the tools that we're going to be using, such as the Angular Material Components, Firebase, and Angular Fire 2. And I've set up the config in the vendor bundle and the System.js config, but you can find that in the GitHub repo later if you want to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and serve right now. So ng serve. And we're showing this on mobile on the iOS simulator, but of course this works on desktop as well. So you can see the skeleton app already running. So we're going to build this app in 3 parts. We're going to start with the application shell, which is essentially just the application layout or scaffold that will render immediately. Then we're going to move on to the dynamic content, such as the puppy profiles. And then at the end, we'll hook it up to that Firebase real-time database. So our application shell is going to be a pretty iconic application shell. It's going to have 3 parts. It'll have the toolbar at the top with the title, Puppy Love, a hamburger menu icon on the left that will open up a side nav menu. To do this, we're going to use Angular material components. So here in our root component, we're going to import all of those Angular material components all at once here. We're also going to add them all to our directives array at once and any providers that we're going to use. So we have the perfect Angular material component for the toolbar. It's called MD toolbar. And you just wrap your title in that. And we can set the color to primary here, which is the primary color of our theme. And since we didn't set one, it's just the default material theme. So you can see we have this lovely toolbar here. Next, we're going to add the hamburger icon. Since we want this to be a static thing that renders right away, we don't want it to go over a network request. So we're just going to use an inline SVG, which I have in a snippet here. And then we're going to wrap this in a button tag for accessibility, since this is going to open the side nav. And we're also going to add this MD icon button attribute so that it doesn't have any of the default button styles that might make the icon look a little funny. Okay, so here we have our icon. Next, let's add the side nav menu. So since we're creating a side nav layout, you might imagine that we have an MD side nav layout component here. We can wrap everything in, and we want it to be full screen. And while we're in here, we're also going to add some inline styles to give a background to that side nav layout. So it's going to have a background that is RGBA of 8%. And then for the side nav menu, we can use something called MD side nav. And if you tag it with a local template variable, like side nav, it'll give us access to its API. So when you click this icon, you can just call sidenav.open. So if we go over and we refresh this, you can see we have the side nav. It's pretty skinny right now because we don't actually have any content in it, but this is our application shell. So you'll notice if we refresh this, if we continue to refresh this, you'll never see this application shell blink, and that's because it's re-rendering so quickly. How do we accomplish this? So if you look at our file structure here, we have our main.ts file that you're used to, where we're bootstrapping our app normally, but we also have this main app shell.ts file. And what this does is it passes our app component into Angular Universal. And Angular Universal will pre-render our app component into a static HTML page that inlines all the styles in the HTML. And you can actually see this. If you look at the dist folder, we have the generated index.html right here. You can see all these inline styles that are pasted right in here, and also the HTML that we've written here at the bottom, which is pretty cool. Then after the first render, we'll use a service worker to fetch things from the cache instead of getting them over the network, which is very fast, but it's not turned on in development mode for reasons that you might imagine. Okay, so we have our application shell. Let's focus on actually adding some content. So we have this empty side nav. Let's put a list of navigation links in here. So if we want to do that, let's go back to our app component. We can use something called MD nav list. And MD nav list allows you to create a list of anchors. So we're going to have one for each view. And then each list item is going to have 2 lines. So it's going to have one line with the view's name and one line with the view's description. Then we're also going to have an icon for each of these. And we can use something called MD icon, which is a really easy way to add material design icons. So if you have the material design font loaded, you can just load the icon by ligature. So if you write something like menu, it'll just turn into the menu icon, which is pretty cool. Here it's actually going to be view.icon though. So let's go ahead and add our views object in here, or array. And it's going to have 2 links, the my account link and the potential dates link. But before we look at this, I want to point out that we need to add shell no render here. And this is a directive that comes with the app shell plugin. So we get 2 directives, shell render and shell no render. Shell render ensures that whatever tag you put it on is only part of the pre-render and not part of the real app. And that's really great for something like a progress bar that you only want to show during the pre-render phase. Shell no render is the opposite. It will not be added to the pre-render pipeline, but it will be part of the real dynamic app. So in this case, for the nav list, since we have these routes, we don't want people to click on them before they're ready, so we're going to shell no render them. Okay, so if we refresh this, you can see that we have this lovely list here on the side, which is pretty cool, but we still have this big empty space here in the middle. So how do we load things inside this existing application shell? Well, we can use the router to do that. So the router gives us this directive called router outlet. And what it is, it's basically a hole that we can load route templates inside. And again, we're going to put shell no render on this because everything that's going in here is not part of the application shell. So what's going to go in here? Well, we're going to have our dog profiles in here, right? So we need to generate a component for this and also a route so that we can load the route inside. So we can do that with the CLI. You can just run ng generate route and then the name of our route. And what this does is it creates a number of files for that component and also creates a route config for us. So if we go in here, we can see that we have this route config here on the bottom. We're actually going to tweak it a little bit because we want this to be our default route. And then if we go to our system config, we can add the route that we just added. So app/dogs. Then if we reload this page here, you'll see that you have the boilerplate dogs works, and that lets us know that the dog component is loading inside this app shell. Okay, so let's check out that dogs folder in here. So if we open up dogs.component.ts, we have our component boilerplate here. We're going to use a number of new material components for this, so we're going to go ahead and add all our imports at once again. And then we're also going to add any directives that we're going to use and any providers that we're going to use. So in our dogs, the HTML, let's go ahead and start adding some dog profiles. So each dog profile is going to be a card. And each card is going to have the dog's name, and for its card content, it's going to have the dog's tagline. We're also going to make this a secondary class so it looks a little nicer. Then it's also going to have an image tag with the image of the dog. So it's an all text here. And the source is going to be the dog's image from Michelle's own website. Okay, so let's add this dogs array. So eventually we're going to load this from the database, but for this first iteration, we're just going to have this array that we're just going to paste in here. And then in our CSS, dogs.css, we need to do two things. So first, we need to add that secondary class that I talked about. So let's make this gray. And then for our MD card component, we need to add a margin. And the reason we need to do this is because none of our Angular material components actually have a margin included, much like native elements, just because we don't know where you're going to put them, and it's really up to the user to decide what the right margin is for their application. So if we look over at our app, we have these beautiful cards. We have Angular team dogs here. The last thing we're going to do for this first part of the app is add some action buttons. So if your dog sees another dog that he or she likes, they can do something about it. So let's go back to our docs.html page, and we can add some MD card actions here. And we're going to have two actions. We're going to have one if you want to sniff a potential partner, and one if you want to woof a potential partner. So if you reload this here, we've got these lovely action buttons here. Okay, so we have this app that seems pretty cool. We have our cards, we have our list here on the side, but we're actually loading these dogs from our class, which isn't very cool. It'd be much cooler if we could load them from our database. So let's go ahead and put in that Firebase integration. So since we've already npm installed Firebase and Angular Fire 2 and set it up in our config, in our main.ts file, we can go ahead and import our providers right away. So we're going to need the Firebase providers and also this default Firebase function. So let's go ahead and add them right here. And this default Firebase function is going to tell the Firebase integration where to look for your database queries. And I've already set up a database here at puppyloveio.firebase.io.com, so it knows to look there. So in our dogs component, we can import Angular Fire, which is essentially the helper that we're going to need here, and also the Firebase list observable, which is the type that we're going to get back from the database. And then we can now replace this really long, ugly dogs object. So let's go ahead and delete this. And this is now going to be a Firebase list observable type. And if we inject Angular Fire here, we can set this .dogs to af.database.list @/dogs. And what this does is it sets this .dogs to the Angular Fire's database list function that will look at the RESTful endpoint dogs. So we need to do one more thing, and that's to add the async pipe here. And you have to remember that originally we had an array, and that means that all the values are available immediately, but now we're using an observable, which means the values become available over time. So we need to make sure that ng4 knows that this is asynchronous. So if we look back, we can see that now we have our dogs again, but they're a different list of dogs because they're coming from our database, which is pretty cool. So the last thing we're going to do is we're actually going to add a form to add new dogs to this database. So we can do that again with an MD card. So we can add an MD card title here. Oops. It's just going to say create a profile. We'll have MD card content. That's essentially just going to be our form. Fill in a second. And then our card actions are just going to be a post button. And the color is going to be accent to change things up. So let's see what that looks like. So reload this here. We have this lovely form. Let's add some inputs in here. We have a material component called MD input that can animate our placeholders in a really nice way. So we're going to use that. So we'll add one for name. We'll add another one for the tagline here. And then we'll add a third for the image URL. And once again, for this, we're going to need to add some CSS. So we're just going to make this full width so that it looks right in this context. Okay, so let's allow this to refresh. So now we have this wonderful form with these animating placeholders, but it's not actually connected to anything. So let's connect it up. So in our dogs class, we can create a function called postDog that takes a value of a dog. And the beauty of the Angular Fire integration is we can just run this.dogs.push and then the value, and it will instantly be pushed to the database. It's really cool. So now we just need to let, or actually pass that form value into the function. So we can do this in our HTML. We can create a local template variable that's equal to the form instance. And then when we click this post button, we can just call postDog with f.value. That's it. So if we refresh this here, let's add a new dog here. Let's re-add Porter. Let's say, I am a dog, everyone. And then I have this over here, so I don't have to memorize it. So I'm just going to paste it in. This is just going to be porter.png. So if I hit post and I scroll down, you'll see I have a new dog here at the bottom, Porter, which is pretty cool. So this is our app, which is awesome, but I want to show you a few more things. One thing is that you can actually add this to the home screen immediately. You'll notice we didn't actually do any setup for this. This comes right out of the mobile toolkit. It sets this up for you. So if you hit add, you can see we have this lovely app icon here, and if you click on it, it'll open into a native looking app experience. So we have everything that we had before, except it looks like a native app, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's it for the demo. So if you want to learn more about Angular 2 or any of the things that we showed today, we have a wonderful doc site at angular.io. We also had an NG conference a few weeks ago, so if you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend watching those videos.